how would your view, we can end on this, how would your view of substance dualism account for AI becoming conscious? Would the the neural network, or would it just simply need to be directly aware of itself as
Mhm.
a simple immaterial substance? So, like, does it just require that intentionality directed at itself as the subject, and then it's seeing itself, or having knowledge by acquaintance of itself as the certain properties that a substance that's not identical to the body would have?
Right. So that would be whether or not the AI could know whether or not it's a thinking subject. The problem is that these, so take the, the Turing test, or take the way that people are describing or testing whether or not large language models are conscious, are based on a behaviorist view of uh, consciousness.
Hmm.
So on the Turing test, you've got, if you can fool, a person to think that what they're interacting with is a human, then that machine that's done the fooling is we're going to count that as being conscious. And now with the large language models, it's um, a level of unpredictability in what the models, or what the neural networks are generating. We didn't expect them to generate this kind of output, and that the output seems to be getting closer and closer to the kind of output that we can get from information that we gather. That's to say that the test there is just, well, if it behaves like we behave, or something close to we behave, then it counts as conscious. That's based on a behavioristic uh, theory of consciousness there. And so what the substance dualist would say, or anyone who rejects behaviorism really, um, and that what the yeah, anyone who rejects it, the dualist is going to say that physicalism in many ways is going to reduce to a form of behaviorism. Functionalism just seems to, certainly in testability, reduced the testability for the presence of consciousness is going to reduce to a kind of behaviorism. But what the substance dualist would say, that that's just not adequate. It's not adequate, and there would be the implications of that would be, one, the ability for us to know whether or not an AI is conscious is far more difficult than we think right now, and that ought to give us pause in terms of how we are developing and to what degree we're developing these technologies. Because if it is conscious and we can't detect it, then we're going to have a much higher likelihood of harming, an AI person, if there could be such a thing, because it'll be conscious and we just couldn't know, or don't know, or
Mm-hmm.
unlikely to know. Or we're developing things that we think are conscious but really aren't, and then giving them certain rights and responsibilities that only should be had by conscious things, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
problem. So one thing is a substance dualist could, in virtue of raising the bar of how we would measure consciousness, would have great implications for how it is that we go about, and to the degree that we go about developing certain technologies. It would also have, like,
Mm.
so part of this is what's called the alignment problem, how it is that we can get AIs to think like us in various ways, especially ethical ways. And that seems to be dangerous, um, in part because we don't know what's going on inside of large language models. So our programming, it's not transparent to us how our programming will be linked up with, or lined up with, our ways of thinking. But if our ways of thinking are not discernible merely by the output, then you would have reason to think that the alignment problem is worse than we think it is. And so there's greater caution that we should have in producing these sorts of technologies. And then I'll say, lastly, too,
Oh.
the unity of consciousness problem, and this is in the new book I'm writing, there'll be a whole chapter on this, is if the unity of consciousness is a phenomenal consciousness is a requirement for the possibility of a subjective consciousness, then we have an in principle reason to think that there just can't be any subjective consciousness that has separable parts. And as far as we can discern, any sort of future AI in principle is going to have separable parts. If it doesn't, then it'll be a candidate for being a soul. But that's to say that, an AI having consciousness is just not possible. Right? Which also would
is there a worry that sets the bar too high and we miss the fact that it has become conscious, which you mentioned?
Well, yeah, that's a problem because, one, we just need to know where the bar is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if the bar is high, then the bar is high, and we need to acknowledge that. Because like you said, if the bar is high, and we don't understand yet how to discern the bar with an AI, then we could develop, because let's say that it's the outputs that it has or the level of thinking that it has that might be indicative of something that's conscious, let's just say the evidence for it is not transparent to us, then we can develop something that's conscious without knowing it and think that it's not because its behaviors aren't there. That is to say that it seems pretty obvious that things can behave as if they're not conscious, but be conscious. And if you're measuring it at the level of behavior or a particular kind of output, but consciousness is far more than that, or the epistemic features of consciousness are far more than that, then it seems like you're creating things that, if they're conscious, are fit for certain rights, and that'll be missed out, and you'll just end up killing tons of artificial subjects or people, if there could be such a thing, right?
Right. Wow. That's both scary and like a power of your research program.